While I was fighting for my life in intensive care, my family was basking in Hawaii, spending my last savings, so I decided to take action. When they returned, they found something near the house that made them call me 73 times. If you are watching this, kindly subscribe and let me know where you are watching from, and I hope that you're safe wherever you are. Let me tell you how a 72-year-old grandmother learned to bite back when pushed too far. My eyes snapped open to blinding white light. Panic hit first. Where was I? Sharp tubes scraped my throat. Wires clung to my chest like spiderwebs. I tried to sit up, but my body felt like it belonged to someone else. The room spun. Machines beeped frantically around me. This wasn't my bedroom in our old farmhouse. This was sterile, cold, wrong. I reached for my throat, desperate to remove whatever was choking me, but my arms barely responded. Help, I tried to say, but only a wheeze escaped. Footsteps rushed toward me. A woman in scrubs appeared at my bedside, her face calm but alert. Behind her, more medical staff crowded into the small space. "Mrs. Henderson, you're safe," she said, her voice steady. "I'm Dr. Martinez. Please don't try to remove the oxygen tube." Safe. I wasn't safe. I was trapped in this mechanical nightmare, and I couldn't remember how I'd gotten here. Where am I? What happened to me? My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Mrs. Henderson, you're in the hospital. You had a massive stroke 12 days ago. Please stay calm. The worst is behind you." 12 days. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. 12 days of my life gone. I stared at Dr. Martinez, searching her face for lies, but found only professional concern. 12 days. Where were my children? Where was my son Michael? My daughter Sarah? Dr. Martinez's expression shifted slightly. Something flickered in her eyes. Hesitation, maybe discomfort. "Regarding your family, I haven't seen them in recent days. Right now, it's important that you rest." Rest? How could I rest when my children weren't here? Michael lived just 15 minutes away. Even if work kept him busy, surely he'd visit his mother in the ICU. Unless something had happened to them too. The machines around my bed continued their electronic symphony. Through the window, I could see familiar oak trees in the distance. At least I was still in Cedar Falls. Dr. Martinez checked the monitors, making notes on a tablet. Her movements were efficient, practiced. How many confused old women like me had she seen? "Your brain function is recovering well," she said, looking back at me. "Your body went through significant trauma, but you're responding excellently to treatment." I tried to process this information. A stroke. At 72, I'd always prided myself on my health. 40 years of teaching elementary school had kept me active, and retirement hadn't slowed me down much. But apparently my body had other plans. "I need to call Michael," I said. "Your personal effects are in the hospital safe. Once you're stronger, we can arrange for you to use your phone." Personal effects. Like I was already dead. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical tests and careful monitoring. Nurses came and went, checking my vitals, adjusting medications. Each time someone entered the room, I hoped it might be Michael or Sarah. Each time, disappointment settled deeper in my chest. By afternoon, the initial panic had faded, replaced by a different kind of anxiety. Where was my family? Dr. Martinez's evasive answer troubled me. In all my years, Michael had never been the type to abandon responsibility. Even as a child, he'd been reliable, dutiful. Maybe he didn't know about the stroke. Maybe the hospital hadn't been able to reach him. That had to be it. I watched the afternoon shadows lengthen through my window as evening approached. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I'd insist on getting my phone back. I'd call Michael myself, clear up this misunderstanding. But deep down, something whispered that this wasn't a misunderstanding at all. 5 days transformed me from an invalid into something resembling a human being again. I could sit up without the world spinning. My voice had returned to its normal tone, instead of the whispered rasp that had embarrassed me earlier. Dr. Martinez entered for her afternoon rounds, tablet in hand, wearing the same professional smile that had greeted me every day since I'd awakened. "How are we feeling today, Mrs. Henderson?" "Much better," I said, and meant it. The fog in my brain had lifted. My hands were steady. Even my appetite had returned, though hospital food left much to be desired. She went through her routine examination, checking my pulse, listening to my heart, reviewing the monitors that had become my constant companions. Your indicators have improved significantly, Mrs. Henderson. Your recovery is remarkable for someone your age. I think we can discharge you in 2 or 3 days. Relief flooded through me. Home, my own bed, my own kitchen, my familiar surroundings in the house I'd shared with Harold for 35 years before he passed. That's wonderful news, doctor. What about my phone? I need to contact my children. Here it is. The nurse brought it from your personal effects. You can use it now, but don't overexert yourself. She handed me the device, a smartphone that Michael had insisted I get last Christmas. At the time, I'd grumbled about unnecessary technology, but now it felt like a lifeline to the world I'd been cut off from for 17 days. The screen lit up at my touch, battery at 8%, but functional. The notification icons showed missed calls and messages, but I didn't want to check them in front of Dr. Martinez. This conversation with my children needed to be private. Thank you, I said, clutching the phone carefully. You've taken excellent care of me. That's what we're here for. Keep taking your medications, as prescribed, and follow up with your neurologist next week. She made a few more notes, then gathered her materials to leave. Dr. Martinez, I called as she reached the door. Has anyone called about me? Asked about my condition. Her pause lasted just long enough to confirm what I'd suspected. Hospital policy requires us to contact emergency contacts, but we respect patient privacy regarding visitor information. Diplomatic non-answer, professional deflection, but her meaning was clear enough. After she left, I stared at the phone in my hands. 17 days without speaking to my children. In all of Michael's 42 years, we'd never gone that long without contact. Even when he'd moved to Chicago for his first job, he'd called every weekend. The weight of the phone seemed to increase as afternoon faded toward evening. Part of me wanted to dial immediately, to hear Michael's voice and end this mystery, but another part hesitated, afraid of what I might learn. Through my window, the oak trees caught the last rays of sunlight. Soon visiting hours would begin. Maybe Michael would surprise me, walking through that door with an explanation for his absence. Hours passed. No visitors came. By evening I'd made my decision. I'd waited long enough. Whatever had kept Michael and Sarah away, we'd work through it together. That's what families did. The hospital had settled into its nighttime rhythm. Hallway lights dimmed to a soft glow. I'd been rehearsing this conversation for hours, imagining Michael's relief at hearing my voice. My hands trembled slightly as I selected his number from my contacts. 17 days, the longest we'd ever gone without speaking. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, his familiar voice answered. Mom. Joy flooded through me at that single word. He was safe, alive, available. Michael, finally. Where are you, honey? I haven't had contact with you for 17 days. Why didn't you visit the hospital? My excitement made the words tumble together. I wanted to tell him everything. The fear, the confusion, the medical staff who'd taken such good care of me. Listen, Mom, I can't talk long right now. Sarah and I are in Hawaii. I took some money from your emergency fund for the tickets. You understand, we needed a vacation. The words hit me like physical blows. Hawaii, vacation, my money. What? Hawaii. 17 days ago I was dying in the ICU, and you were flying off on vacation. Background sounds filtered through the phone connection. Ocean waves, distant music. The carefree atmosphere of a tropical resort while I'd been fighting for my life, attached to machines, wondering if I'd survive another day. Don't be so dramatic, Mom. You can see you're alive. Listen, international calls are expensive here. We'll talk when we get back in a week. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, unable to process what had just happened. The cheerful sounds of Hawaii still echoed in my memory. Waves lapping against beaches while I'd struggled to breathe through tubes. My money, they'd stolen my money. The emergency fund I'd kept hidden in my bedroom closet, saved from decades of teaching, set aside for real emergencies. Medical bills, home repairs, end-of-life expenses. Money I'd planned to leave them someday when I no longer needed it. They'd taken it for a vacation, while their mother lay unconscious in intensive care. But something fundamental had shifted inside me during that phone call, like tectonic plates beneath the Earth's surface. I wasn't the same woman who'd collapsed with a stroke 17 days ago, and when they returned from their stolen paradise, they'd discover exactly how much I'd changed. The discharge paperwork felt symbolic as I signed each page with steady hands. My signature was stronger than it had been in years, fueled by a clarity that surprised even me. Remember, Mrs. Henderson, no strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks. Take your medications exactly as prescribed, Dr. Martinez reminded me. I nodded, pocketing the pill bottles and instruction sheets. My few personal belongings fit in a small bag: wallet, phone, the clothes I'd worn 18 days ago when the ambulance brought me here. The taxi ride through Cedar Falls' familiar streets felt surreal. Everything looked exactly the same, but I was seeing it through different eyes. The tree-lined neighborhoods, the small-town charm, the life I'd lived before I understood what my own children thought of me. 20 minutes later, we pulled into the driveway of 1247 Elm Street, the house I'd shared with Harold, where I'd raised Michael and Sarah, where I'd planned to spend my remaining years in peace. The key still worked. The front door swung open to silence. Inside, evidence of their hasty departure scattered throughout the rooms. Dirty dishes in the sink. Sarah's makeup scattered across the guest bathroom counter. Michael's work clothes draped over the living room chair. They'd left in a hurry, eager to catch their flight to paradise. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, each step deliberate and purposeful. Behind my dresser, where I'd kept my emergency fund for 20 years, the loose floorboard had been pried up carelessly. The metal box that had contained $12,000 in cash lay empty, tossed aside like garbage. $12,000. My backup plan for medical emergencies, home repairs, funeral expenses, gone. But as I stood in that violated bedroom, something unexpected happened. Instead of despair, I felt relief. Clarity. For 30 years I'd wondered if I was being too harsh in my judgments of my children. Maybe they really were struggling. Maybe the failures weren't entirely their fault. Maybe I expected too much. Now I knew better. I walked downstairs to the kitchen and found Tom Reed's business card in the drawer. Tom had handled the paperwork when Harold and I bought this house 40 years ago. He'd built a solid reputation in Cedar Falls' real estate market. My fingers were steady as I dialed his number. Reed Realty, Tom speaking. Tom, this is Eleanor Henderson. I need to sell the house on Elm Street as quickly as possible. A pause. Eleanor, you just got out of the hospital. Maybe you should rest first. Think everything through. No, Tom. I need cash buyers. Maximum speed. Do you have such clients? Well, yes. There are several investment companies looking for properties in your neighborhood. But this is a serious decision, Eleanor. Are you sure? More than sure. Can we start tomorrow? Another pause. Tom's professional instincts were warring with his concern for my health. If you're certain, yes. I have 2 investors who might be interested. Properties in your area have been selling well. But Eleanor, this is your family home. Have you discussed this with Michael and Sarah? They're traveling. I'm handling this myself. All right then. I'll make some calls tonight. Set up showings for tomorrow afternoon. You'll need to have the place looking its best. After I hung up, I sat in Harold's old recliner and looked around our living room. Have you ever felt so betrayed that you wanted to disappear completely? Because that's exactly what I was planning to do. By the time Michael and Sarah returned from Hawaii, this house would belong to someone else. Their childhood home, their inheritance, their safety net gone. Just like my $12,000. Just like 18 days of my life, while I fought to survive. Some lessons could only be learned the hard way. The next morning brought a flurry of activity that would have exhausted me before the stroke. But anger was a powerful motivator, and I had work to do. Tom arrived at noon with Margaret Price, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in investment properties. Lovely location, Margaret said, though her tone suggested she was already calculating rental income potential, rather than appreciating the oak trees Harold had planted. The tour began in the living room. I'd spent the morning arranging furniture to maximize space, removing family photos that might make the house feel too personal for an investor's vision. Margaret took notes on her tablet, measuring rooms with a laser device, checking the condition of hardwood floors I'd maintained lovingly for decades. Original oak throughout, Tom highlighted. Eleanor's maintained this place beautifully. Margaret nodded absently, running her finger along windowsills I'd cleaned that morning, testing the ceiling fan Harold had installed, opening and closing closet doors with mechanical precision. In the kitchen, she examined the updated fixtures, the backsplash tiles I'd chosen so carefully years ago, the spotless appliances. Her expression remained neutral, professional. The bones are solid, she admitted, checking the water pressure at the sink. But the market's been challenging lately. My heart rate increased, though whether from anxiety or determination, I couldn't tell. The basement inspection went smoothly. Margaret simply noted the furnace condition, the electrical panel upgrades, the foundation walls Harold had waterproofed himself. Back upstairs, she settled into Harold's recliner and opened her portfolio. The house is in decent condition, but your asking price doesn't match current market values. I can offer 30% less. The number hit like a physical blow. 30%. That wasn't negotiation. That was insulting. That's too low for a house of this quality. Margaret shrugged, closing her portfolio with a snap. Then find another buyer. Good luck. She was standing, shaking Tom's hand, walking toward her car before I could fully process the rejection. Professional, efficient, completely indifferent to the desperation she'd probably sensed but chosen to exploit. Tom lingered after her departure, his face creased with concern. Eleanor, don't be discouraged. This is normal for first showings. Tomorrow, we'll try with another client. Tomorrow. Michael and Sarah would return tomorrow evening, expecting to find their childhood home waiting like a safety net they could continue abusing indefinitely. Instead, they'd find what? A mother who'd failed to even sell the house she'd threatened to sell. But I wasn't finished yet. The second investor arrived at precisely 10 o'clock the next morning. Robert Chen looked nothing like Margaret Price. Mid-50s, wearing khakis and a polo shirt, carrying a worn leather briefcase instead of an expensive portfolio. When he shook my hand, his grip conveyed genuine interest rather than predatory calculation. Beautiful property, he said, surveying the oak trees before we'd even entered the house. These mature neighborhoods maintain value better than newer developments. The tour proceeded differently from yesterday's clinical inspection. Robert asked questions about the neighborhood, the history of the house, winter maintenance requirements. He examined the same features Margaret had dismissed, but with appreciation for quality rather than focus on minimal investment. You've maintained this place wonderfully, he observed, running his hand along the banister Harold had sanded and stained himself. Craftsmanship like this is rare in newer construction. In the kitchen, he tested cabinet doors, checked the stove's functionality, examined the plumbing connections. His movements suggested someone who understood both construction and long-term property value. The layout works well for families, he noted. Cedar Falls needs more quality rental options. The basement inspection went smoothly. Robert focused on mechanical systems, storage capacity, and structural soundness rather than searching for flaws to exploit in negotiations. Back in the living room, he settled onto the couch and opened his briefcase. Not for documents, but for a calculator and measurement notebook filled with handwritten observations. I like the house. Location is excellent. Condition is better than most properties I've seen. I can pay cash, but I'll need to reduce the price by 15%. 15%. Reasonable, fair even. Is this your final offer? Final. And I can close by end of week. End of week. Michael and Sarah would return tonight to find their inheritance already sold, the paperwork in motion, their safety net legally dissolved. Deal. Robert's face brightened with genuine satisfaction. Not the cold triumph of someone who'd exploited desperation, but the pleasure of a fair transaction that benefited everyone involved. Excellent. Tom and I will start the paperwork tomorrow. The handshake felt like an ending and a beginning simultaneously. After they left, I stood in the center of my living room, soon to be Robert Chen's rental property, and felt something I hadn't experienced since that devastating phone call from Hawaii. Complete satisfaction. Not the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but the deeper contentment of a plan executed successfully despite obstacles. The afternoon stretched ahead, like a gift, hours to prepare for the confrontation that would reshape our relationship permanently. Michael and Sarah would arrive expecting the same weak mother who'd always been there to clean up their messes. Instead, they'd find a stranger who'd learned the difference between kindness and foolishness. Tom's office smelled like fresh coffee and leather chairs, the scent of successful deals and satisfied clients. I arrived early the next morning carrying a folder with my identification and banking information, ready to transform promises into legal reality. All documents are ready, Tom said, spreading the papers across his polished desk. Robert's bringing a cashier's check. This is moving remarkably fast, Eleanor. Each page represented another step away from the life Michael and Sarah assumed would always be waiting for their next crisis. I signed each document with steady hands, my signature flowing as smoothly as it had 40 years ago when Harold and I first bought this house. Full circle, except this time I was choosing freedom over family obligation. The house is officially sold, Tom announced, as Robert arrived with the cashier's check. Congratulations to both of you. The amount was exactly what we'd agreed upon, enough to secure my independence and prove my point without leaving me wealthy. Thank you for everything, Tom. You've been wonderful. The gratitude was real. Without Tom's professionalism and discretion, this plan would have remained an angry old woman's fantasy instead of executed justice. What will you do now? Where will you move? Tom's curiosity was natural. In 40 years of knowing me, he'd probably never seen me make such a dramatic life change. I have a plan. Don't worry about me. Mystery served my purposes better than explanation. The fewer people who knew my new address, the better. The bank visit took longer than expected. Converting a large cashier's check into cash raised eyebrows and required additional identification, but by afternoon I walked out with enough bills to fund my new life comfortably. The house waited for me, completely empty, except for the note I'd been composing mentally for days. I'd written and rewritten the words in my mind, crafting each sentence to deliver maximum impact while maintaining dignity. The kitchen table, where Harold and I had made so many important decisions, seemed like the right place for my final communication with my children. I sat down with legal pad and began writing in careful handwriting. Michael and Sarah, when you read this, the house has already been sold. Your belongings are in storage unit 47 at Cedar Storage. The key is under the doormat. Don't try to find me. It's pointless. For 30 years I've been your safety net. Every financial crisis, every poor decision, every consequence you couldn't face alone, I was there with my checkbook and my patience. When Michael got fired from the bank, I paid his mortgage for 6 months. When Sarah's husband left her, I covered her credit card debt and car payments. When you needed vacation money, you helped yourselves to my emergency fund while I lay unconscious in intensive care. 18 days I fought for my life in that hospital room. 18 days wondering if I would survive to see my family again. While I struggled to breathe through tubes and machines, you were sipping tropical drinks with money stolen from your dying mother. You called me dramatic for objecting to your theft and abandonment. You hung up on me because international calls were expensive. You treated my near-death experience like an inconvenience to your vacation schedule. Now you'll understand what it means to have no safety net, no mother to bail you out, no family home to mortgage for your next crisis. You're both adults. It's time you learn to face consequences like adults. Don't contact me. Don't look for me. Don't expect reconciliation or forgiveness. This isn't cruelty, it's education. You're finally old enough to learn that actions have consequences. Your father would be ashamed of what you've become. I'm ashamed I enabled it for so long. Learn to stand on your own feet. It's never too late to become the people I hoped you'd be. Eleanor Henderson. I left it propped against the sugar bowl where they would definitely see it. Walking through the empty rooms one final time, I felt only relief. No ghosts of Christmas mornings or birthday parties haunted these bare walls. Just the echo of my footsteps moving toward a future built on self-respect instead of family obligation. The front door closed behind me with a satisfying click. Tomorrow I'd be gone. Tonight I'd sleep in the Comfort Inn while my children returned to nothing. Sunlight streaming through hotel curtains woke me at dawn. For a moment I forgot where I was. Then memory flooded back, bringing satisfaction instead of confusion. I was free. My new apartment in Riverside was modest but sufficient. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, mountain views from the living room window, everything a 72-year-old woman needed to live comfortably, without the weight of ungrateful children pressing down on her shoulders. Coffee tasted different here. Better somehow. The simple pleasure of morning routine without wondering when the next crisis would arrive, when the next desperate phone call would interrupt my peace. At exactly 9:30, my phone began buzzing. The screen showed Michael's name and number, followed immediately by another call, then another. I let them all go to voicemail, watching the missed call counterclimb with scientific fascination. By noon, the number had reached 73 calls. I guess they finally understood what it meant to be left with nothing. What would you do if your own family stole from you while you were dying? I scrolled through the call log, noting the timestamp progression. The first few calls came 20 minutes apart, probably Michael trying the house phone, then my cell, then calling back casually. By hour 2, the intervals shortened to 5 minutes. By hour 4, constant desperation. The voicemails painted a predictable picture without my needing to listen. I could imagine Michael's voice progressing from confusion to anger to panic, to pleading. Sarah probably grabbing the phone to add her own brand of entitled outrage. None of it mattered anymore. Now they knew how it felt to come home and find nothing. Like I'd found an empty emergency fund while they were enjoying themselves with my money. Through my new living room window, the mountains looked exactly the same as they had from my old house. Eternal, unchanging, indifferent to human drama. The mountains had watched Harold and me build our life together, witnessed Michael and Sarah grow from innocent children into selfish adults, observed my transformation from enabler to educator. This wasn't revenge, it was education. My phone buzzed again. Call number 74. I turned it face down on the coffee table and returned to my morning newspaper, reading local Riverside news with genuine interest. The community center needed volunteers for senior activities. The library was hosting a book club focused on local history. A hiking group met every Wednesday for mountain trail walks. Life was beginning again at 72, and it felt like the first honest life I'd lived in decades. The calls would stop eventually. Michael and Sarah would exhaust their panic, accept their situation, and start the difficult process of building adult resilience. Or they wouldn't, and they'd spend their remaining years blaming everyone except themselves for their problems. Either way, it was no longer my responsibility. I'd spent 30 years trying to raise children who refused to grow up. Now finally, they would face the choice every adult must make: learn to stand alone or fall down and stay there. I hoped they'd choose to stand, but if they didn't, at least I'd know I'd done everything possible to teach them the difference between kindness and weakness. 3 months later, the calls had stopped completely. The desperate voicemails had evolved from rage to bargaining to acceptance to silence. Sometimes isn't the hardest love the kind that says no. I'd created new routines in Riverside. Monday morning book club at the library. Wednesday hiking with a group of surprisingly spry seniors. Friday volunteering at the food bank, helping other families navigate their crises with more wisdom than I'd shown my own children for decades. My small apartment had become a sanctuary. Harold's photograph smiled from the mantelpiece. My teaching awards hung in the hallway. The emergency fund I'd rebuilt sat safely in a bank account only I could access. The mountains outside my window caught the afternoon light, glowing gold against the blue sky. Beautiful, permanent, peaceful. Just like the satisfaction settling into my bones. 6 months after that day in the hospital, I received a single text message from Sarah. "Mom, I got a job. Michael too, we're learning to manage our money. Maybe someday we can talk." I stared at those words for a long time before responding. "I'm proud of you, that's all I ever wanted." Some bridges needed to be burned completely before new ones could be built on solid foundations. Michael and Sarah had taught me an unexpected lesson through their betrayal. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to succeed or fail entirely on their own merit. At 72, I was finally ready to live for myself. The mountains stood eternal and unchanged, but I had been transformed completely. From enabler to educator, from victim to victor, from weak to wise. And for the first time in 30 years, I slept peacefully, knowing I'd chosen love over comfort, consequences over convenience, and strength over sentiment. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, but once learned, they change everything. If you found this story powerful, please like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that will make you think differently about family love and standing up for yourself. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and let me know in the comments, have you ever had to make a tough choice to teach someone you love a difficult lesson? Your story might help someone else find their strength too.